Canada, Israel. I know we have so many of you. It is with much excitement. I told you we have an excellent guest this afternoon. And by sheer curiosity, literally serendipity, right? I had asked him, imposed on his schedule to join me today because I had seen him talking so knowledgeably about this whole security issue, African democracy, Niger, ECOWAS, etc., etc. And his name is David Otto. David had said yes. And then, as today would have it, there was that incredible, and I think it was incredible TikTok turnaround, don't know what you want to call it, by ECOWAS this afternoon. Okay? So it's my absolute pleasure. You will be able to, we only have an hour. I'll do my best to include your questions. The best thing to do is send it to me on WhatsApp early as you're listening to him, 0809 597 5805. So, let me introduce my guest. David Otto is a counter-terrorism expert on West Africa. He is director for Geneva Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. David, how are you? Can you hear me?
I'm fine. Yes, I can hear you very well.
Excellent.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
No, we should be thanking you.
Wishing to...
Everybody's probably calling on
Well,
you since that whole conference call. Right?
Yes, it's been a very, very busy time for the continent. Since the several coups that we've seen happening around the Sahel and West Africa, it's been a very busy time. And I think as Africans, we need to speak out. We need to signpost right directions in terms of how we want to see the economy of the continent grow and how we want to see the level of insecurity reduced. So, talking about these issues, it's very important and quite proactive in a sense.
Thank you. So, why have we got you here today? First and foremost, let's sort of move a little bit back, because one of the things I like to say is, or to most people, and certainly to my mind, with the increasing trend of coups happening across West Africa in particular, it would appear that Africa's democracy is rather fragile, if not on the ground. What do you think?
Well, as you know, it's not now that we're witnessing military coups. We've had military coups in the 50s, in the 60s, the 70s. Of course, this is the period when most African countries were gaining their independence. Yes, we have seen a resurgence in the new millennia, especially in the last 10 years. We've seen coups coming in, especially from the Sahel belt, which, of course, we've talked about countries like Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso. We've seen coups in Sudan. Remember, there was a coup in Zimbabwe. We've had now a military coup in Niger. But we're just talking about the ones that succeeded. And success in a military coup would mean that a coup would last between 1 to 7 days. But in the past, I have to emphasize, Africa has had more than 115 military coups. And seems to be one of the continents with the highest number of coups d'etats. And it is, again, a continent that has embraced what we define as democracy. But the problem with that, especially with the recent indications of the coups that we've seen, is that there has been some kind of a fragility of that democratic process in the continent. So, for example, democracy would be the government of the people, for the people, and by the people. But what we've seen in the case of Africa is that it is a government of some people, by some people and for few people. And with a continent that has a greater number of youth that are below the age of 25, more than 75% of the continent's population, these are youth. And there is no reflection of that government of the people. A lot of the youth, feel that they are sidelined, and they seem to have been educated to stay away from politics. But not just that, the way that democracy is practiced, in the sense of real democracy, it's something that we don't seem to enjoy in the continent. So I think the problem has been with democracy itself. So, for example, we talk about the separation of powers.
Yeah.
Democracy ought to have an independence of the judiciary from the executive and the legislature. But we constantly see scenarios and situations in Africa where the legislative body, is kind of compromised by the executive, and that leaders who have been in power would change the rules of the midway, maybe by staying in power for further than the constitution demands, or by coming to power through fraudulent means, through these electoral bodies which has personalities that are put there by the executive. So in general, democracy has always had its difficulties in terms of how it is being operated within the African continent. And I am no doubt, no doubt that we see that democracy is being eroded, because of course we do not have true democracy in the continent. That's a fact. And the fact that we have a democratic system that relies a lot on the military, on the security services for the purpose of regime protection rather than national security protection. Increasingly, the military sees that it has a big role to play in protecting the regimes. It has a big role to play in protecting leaders. And it then fancies itself to become, if they are protecting the leaders, why not run themselves? So this is exactly what we are witnessing in the continent, a democratic process and system that doesn't work. And increasingly, we're seeing military leaders taking advantage of that. And the common theme, I have to add, has been that one, leaders promise what they cannot deliver. Number two, they cannot deal with the economy. They are corrupt, and they cannot deal with the high level of insecurity in the continent. Those are the excuses. Those are the justifications that we see. And some of these justifications are real. They're happening. And if you look at the countries that we're talking about, Mali, Niger, Guinea, Burkina Faso, these are countries that are rich in human and mineral resources, but we still do not have leaders who can manage those countries and develop them. So democracy is in a decline, and it is being replaced by these military coups and juntas. We must condemn them, I have to say, but these are the options that we have in the continent as we speak. Over to you.
You said something which I think is critical, and it will bring us straight back to where we are today. You said the military have always felt that their jobs were, sort of protecting the leaders and, ensuring peace. But now they're thinking, if they're not doing it right, why don't we just do it ourselves? Which I believe is what brought us to where we are today with Niger, right? So I'm very conscious of time, really, unfortunately. Here's the thing. We heard Niger, there was a coup, and then ECOWAS said, and we heard it, you can tell me if I'm wrong, you can tell me what you heard, but I heard a 7-day ultimatum, right? I heard them say, we are giving Niger a 7-day ultimatum to reinstate Bazoum, President Bazoum. Is that correct, or did we mishear, or did we misinterpret what
I think
said?
I think that's very correct. ECOWAS made it very clear after the military coup on the 26th of June that in the event that President Bazoum is not reinstated, in the event that the democratic process is not restored, in the event that the constitutional order is not restored within 7 days, ECOWAS would use all measures, including the use of force. So that was a very clear ultimatum.
Right.
But, you can recognize, just like myself, that the moment you find a body like ECOWAS, trying to explain what he said, try to, use another language, it shows that either, they are backtracking, kind of pussyfooting behind, what they said before, or simply, they probably didn't know what they were saying. I mean, but ECOWAS has very intelligent set of individuals. I don't think they didn't know what they were saying. I think what ECOWAS is doing is, trying to calm the waters. They do not want to acknowledge that the decision to initiate an ultimatum to a sovereign state in the very beginning of a crisis was a wrong footing. I believe what ECOWAS should have done in the beginning was to have what you call a gradual process of levying sanctions against Niger. But they did not read the signs on the wall. Niger was going to, of course, rely on countries like Burkina Faso and Mali. ECOWAS did not see that coming. ECOWAS did not see the fact that Niger was going to rely on its population. A lot of the narrative that the military junta had put out there was that this was a fight against neocolonialism. It was a fight against regimes that were puppet to the French. It was a fight for the survival of the country. When it succeeded in assembling other sister security agencies to support it, it was too late for ECOWAS at that point in time to issue that kind of an ultimatum. So you're very correct. The ultimatum was very clear. ECOWAS said they would invade within 7 days. They did not, of course. I knew from the beginning it was a bluff because, of course, we understand what it takes to launch a military operation. It's not by declaration. It's by mobilization, putting together resources, planning of the operation, but of course, thinking about what your enemy is going to do as well. So we are in a position at this point in time when ECOWAS has to rely on dialogue. But at the same time, it still believes that it doesn't want to take away the use of military intervention out of the table, but simply because it had put it in the first place. So this is where we are in terms of that 7 days ultimatum. Over to you.
Okay, so of course, after the 7 days ultimatum came the sanctions, and if you like, turning off of the lights, came Algeria coming to the aid of the Nigerians and saying, look, if Nigeria won't give you light, we'll give you a bit of light. Here's the thing. There's been a lot of conspiracy theories, exaggerations, even ignorance about what the truth is. And the reason I say that is, you mentioned something. You said the military started to put out information out there to say, look, we are fighting for our country, for the people. We are trying to get our country back so that the rewards of the resources that was rightfully given to us by God is earned and spent by our people. Too many of our people are poor. The French are holding on to it, right? Is that correct? I would like you to sort of clear, so as many of these sort of propagandas, if you like, or the truth. Let's separate the truth from the falsehoods with regards to the activity of the French government in Niger and what they do with the resources there, and of course, by extension, America and the rest of the West. Over to you.
Yes, you are very correct. I think one thing which we have to all acknowledge is the fact that propaganda and disinformation is always the first casualty of any war or any crisis. And, it's not different from what we've seen in the case of Niger. Of course, you and I know that Niger Republic is a very strategic country. It is surrounded by 7 states. It is landlocked. And you have very fragile states that surround Niger. Nigeria itself has a border spanning more than 1,600 kilometers. Algeria does the same, which is by 1,000 kilometers. Now, what you've got to understand is ECOWAS does not have, for example, the leverage, of maybe applying sanctions that would entail a complete shutdown of all the borders that surround the 7 states of Niger, simply because countries like Chad, Libya, and Algeria are not members of ECOWAS.
Right.
But also, Burkina Faso and Mali, are against any sanctions, by ECOWAS. So from that perspective, ECOWAS, should not have initiated any sanctions that would, would have to do with maybe closing the borders, because of course it's not going to be effective. Niger will simply find friends elsewhere. So what ECOWAS was doing initially was to try and buy the hearts and minds, and the support of some of the neighboring states that were not members of ECOWAS. So, for example, they deployed the president of Chad, Mahatma Idris, as the first envoy. Unfortunately, that was a big diplomatic disaster because, of course, Idris Deby Jr. himself is a beneficiary of a military coup. Well, some people would say it's a constitutional coup because, of course, the father was not overthrown militarily, but by constitution, Idris Deby was not, of course, the junior was not meant to be the president. So he himself is a beneficiary of the coup.
Yeah.
So it was a terrible PR for the ECOWAS to send him as the envoy. Algeria is a country that is one of the signatories of the 2022 Algiers Agreement, which, of course, is to do with the Trans-Saharan Pipeline project. That project spans from Nigeria in Warri towards Niger and across Algeria. It's an expensive 400,000 kilometers project that will bring a huge amount of gas, being transported from Nigeria through Niger to Algeria, which of course is meant to offset the European states are terming the weaponization of gas by Russia. Mm-hmm. So that's a big pipeline project, which of course will benefit the European Union. And of course, we know that France has been exploiting uranium for more than 4 decades using its French, companies in Niger. We also know that the United States, for example, has 2 military bases, one in Agadez, one in Niamey. These are drone bases, force operation bases that the U.S. has. Germany also has a military base in that country. The Chinese are also there. So they have all been exploiting Niger Republic, and Niger seems to be one of the poorest countries in the world. Mm-hmm. So the question that a lot of Nigerians have been asking is that why do we have a government? Why do we have democracy, which is supposed to be a government of the people, for the people, by the people? Mm-hmm. But then we have the poorest, country in the world. We have a high level of insecurity. We have a high level of corruption. Our economy is in tatters. So a lot of the Nigerians who woke up in the morning of the 26th of June to see that the military had that's the question, because it's easy to say we did this because of high level of corruption, poverty, and lack of security. But the question is, can the military deliver on some of those issues? And this is what I think will be the biggest challenge for the military junta in Niger, because they would have to show the people of Niger that they took power for the right reason and they can deliver. So there is a lot of pressure going on within Niger. They have to make sure that whatever happens, of course, the Nigerian junta has made it clear that they are given a 3 years time frame, not more than 3 years, to hand over a transitional government. We do not know the terms of that. When I say the terms of that, we don't know if the military is going to be part of that government. We don't know if they are going to strip away their military fatigue and, wear civilian clothing and run for positions within the parliament and the government. We don't know that yet. Yeah. But the facts are there. While the military has used this narrative of poverty, economic, situations, military chaos, insecurity, the facts are also there that, of course, Nigerians have been exploited. Now, talk about some of these sanctions which you mentioned. Nigeria has had a contract, some kind of an agreement with Niger that it supplies it with electricity. But, of course, there was a unilateral decision that the Nigerian government made. Of course, we know that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is the chairperson of the of ECOWAS. And he made a decision that is the interest of Nigeria. What is the interest of us member states? Absolutely. And Nigeria are brothers. And just like many other countries in Africa, we don't want to see a situation where an African country suffers because of the deliberate action of another African country. Over to you.
So we don't have much time before I go to break, but I'm going to ask you something. The other...
You get the chance to play and win every day. Simply dial *347 *880 *3#. Specify the number of your tickets or entries from 1 to 10. Choose 1 to continue. You will receive an SMS on instructions to make payments. The draws for participants will be live on Nigeria Info, and you get the chance to win up to 90,000 naira. Tune in to WhatsApp Lagos 11:15 a.m. to 11:25 a.m. or Game On at 8:15 to 8:25 p.m. or the chat station by 10:15 p.m. to 10:25 p.m. Remember, you can play as many times as you like. The more you play, the more your chances of winning. Don't forget, simply dial *347 *880 *3# and play with just 200 naira. Not suitable for persons under the age of 18. And remember to please play responsibly. Terms and conditions apply.
Our bride, you may please sign the marriage certificate.
It's not working. This pen is not working.
Have you ever been in that critical situation where you need to sign that important document, but your pen suddenly stops working? Then you understand the importance of having a reliable ball pen. This is why I love my Beak pen, because it never lets me down in such a serious situation, and it will always work. Be like me. Beak comes in Crystal Original and Beak Crystal Ultrafine. Get a pen you can rely on. Get Beak.
We're back.
We're back.
We're back.
We're back.
We are back.
We're back on 99.3 Nigeria Info.
For the best talk.
Your state governor is said to have ordered immediate employment of 5,000 youths. Don't we need more of these to come from different governments?
Stay with Nigeria Info.
Do you think that maybe those food items just came like that, decayed already? I mean, what is really the truth?
I try to be careful not to use the word hoarding because I do not have that points at that.
Your number one station for talk. 99.3. Let's talk.
Right. Send your messages like literally to WhatsApp, and I promise I will try and put as many of them to David as quickly as I can, because we don't have much time. That's why I can't answer your calls. 0809 597 5805. Here's the other thing. What I was going to ask you before the break, David, is the other sort of perception, if you like, propaganda, misunderstanding, or perhaps it's the truth, who knows, is that there is a perception that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is acting on behalf of the Western government, either be it France, US, or even NATO. What is the truth? Is he acting for anybody?
That's a very common question of common concern that a lot of people have raised. Who is actually supporting ECOWAS for ECOWAS to come up with these kind of decisions? Now, there are two sides to this. The first side, which is the official side, is that ECOWAS itself has different mechanisms in which it has made clear. For example, in its 1999 or 2000 ECOWAS Lomé Protocol, it explicitly says in that protocol, which of course Niger is a signatory to that, it explicitly said in that protocol that for the purpose of preventing crime, conflict, for the purpose of conflict management and conflict resolution, but also for peace and stability, that ECOWAS can intervene in a member state, what we call the intervention, invitation for intervention, that it can intervene in a member state if there is a coup that is ongoing. So that protocol does exist. I mean, I think it's Article 25 of that Lomé protocol.
Right.
So ECOWAS has the right to carry out a military intervention backed by that protocol, which of course Niger is a signatory. But the bigger one, which we must be able to recognize, is that the United Nations Security Council Charter which is Article 2.4, explicitly says that no member is allowed, or any bloc or member is allowed to carry out a military intervention to a sovereign state, unless in situations where there is an authorization from the United Nations, or that member state is doing so for self-defense. So there is a controversy, or under which ECOWAS is actually carrying out this military intervention. Now, the invitation for intervention has to be done by the government. But because we still do not have a government in Niger, I mean, ECOWAS has argued that the call by President Bazoum was effectively an invitation for intervention. But a lot of people have said that President Bazoum does not have the full control of the country to call for kind of a military intervention. So effectively, this has left a lot of people to believe that ECOWAS is being influenced to carry out a military intervention by the European Union, of course, because the European Union has a big stake in Niger. It wants to see the survival of that gas pipeline. The European Union believes that insecurity in Niger could destabilize that project. And there is an interest for a country like Russia to see that project, to fail, because of course Russia would want to monopolize the exportation of gas, and would not want to see the European Union find an alternative. So there is a lot of argument that the US, has only recently, seen to be cuddling with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. I mean, the United States had not sent a significant representative during the inauguration of the president. So a lot of people believe that the US is more concerned and more communicative with the president now because the US has an interest. It has 2 military bases there. The French, do also have a strong influence. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is known to favor Paris over other countries. I mean, most of his visits that he's done.
May I ask why?
Yes. I mean, perhaps it's a personal likeness for Paris. Maybe it could be that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has other political links that he prefers to lean towards Paris. But these are some of the reasons why a lot of commentators have said that ECOWAS is being influenced. Now, I think another critical reason, which makes sense for people to believe that, is because ECOWAS does not have the resources to carry out a military intervention. They don't have the weapons. So if they are planning to go to war in Niger, the question people are asking is where you're going to get the weapons from, where you're going to get the money from. And the answer to that means it's that you're going to get it from the European states. And if the European states are prepared to give you the weapons, then it's likely that they are pushing you towards that war. So it depends on which angle that you're looking at. But there is no doubt that if ECOWAS were to intervene in Niger, they would have to rely on the European Union or maybe UK or France or the United States to supply them with weapons. The question is at what cost? And who is going to pay for that? So this is why a lot of people are saying, don't fight a war in the continent against your own, based on the interest of an outsider.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Right. You mentioned Russia, which brings me to my next question. Excellent segue, by the way. Prigozhin, Wagner, died what? Yesterday, was it? Was it yesterday?
Yes.
It seems like ages ago.
The 23rd.
Yes, right.
The 23rd.
What is that impact on the current situation, if any at all, given, that the man just 2 days, the day before, earlier in the day, he was actually giving, he did a video, he posted a video from Africa. We don't know whether it was in Niger, but it was certainly in Africa. And next thing is that, and we are aware that Wagner or Prigozhin's people were in Niger. What does this mean for the current situation? In particular, the military, Nigerian military, who will presume were dependent or at least relying on them for support.
Well, my opinion has always been, and is still, that Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is the boss of Wagner, he is Wagner, but Wagner is not him. It simply means that, yes, he was the face of Wagner. He could have, he may have died as officially, announced that he died in a plane crash over the northern part of Moscow, in the region of Iver, I think, with 10 others, but also with, his number two, Utkin Wagner, who was the main founder of Wagner itself. So we understand that even though, these are the key people that Wagner has been, putting on the front line as their leaders, but this is an entity that has the ability to survive. It's some kind of a paramilitary, private military contractor in a way that it is war for money or money for war. It pays its fighters and mercenaries. It has a structure that is kind of semi-independent in the sense that the Wagner forces that operate in Mali would have their own unique commander, which is different from the ones that operate in Burkina Faso. The ones who operate in Mozambique, for example, are quite independent from the ones that operate in Central African Republic, or the ones who are allegedly operating in Sudan. So it's an organization that is purely for profit. It deploys men to fight for money. It did the same in Russia over Ukraine. It is now being touted to do the same in Belarus. It has been known to fight for money in Libya. So I don't think for any second that Yevgeny Prigozhin, passing on would be a problem in terms of the operations of Wagner. We would have some kind of a strategic change of leadership, but I think the operations will be the same. We would see the group operating as normal, but with some slight changes in terms of its leadership. In the case of Russia, of course, which is not a key subject of discussion today, we know that Wagner has been integrated within the Russian regular forces. We don't know if when the African leaders went to St. Petersburg for the African-Russia summit, we don't know if they did talk about what the future of Wagner is in terms of, okay, instead of you giving us mercenaries, why don't you send regular forces to partner with us? I don't know if that was part of the conversation that they had in St. Petersburg, but with the death of Wagner, I think a lot of these African leaders will be asking the question of what is the future of Wagner in Russia, in Africa. But I think President Putin would be very quick, hands on the buzzer, to reassure his African counterparts that there will be no operational challenges, there will be no disturbance in terms of Wagner's operations, because clearly Putin needs Africa. He cannot operate without having some links with the African countries, and he will want to make sure that Prigozhin's death, does not, kind of disturb that strategic relationship that he has. So I would see some level of changes at the top level. Maybe a new leader would emerge, but I don't think operationally we would have any impact. And I think countries like Niger would simply rely on Russia to come back to them and say, we would provide you with some support. I mean, I have to mention that the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who is currently in South Africa for the BRICS 15th summit, he made a very clear statement that there's some kind of a development of a counterforce by countries like Mali and Burkina Faso to counter the ECOWAS standby force. So, I don't think Prigozhin's death, is going to shake in the operations of Wagner in the continent. Again, as I said in the beginning, Prigozhin may have been Wagner, but Wagner is not Prigozhin.
Right. So staying on Russia for a couple more minutes. Some have argued, and this is an argument, it's a discussion that's literally in every room where you have Africans across the diaspora, is that some are pro-Russia and anti-West, some are anti-West and pro-Russia. Would Russia basically having a stronger foothold, and if you like China as well, having a stronger foothold across Africa, especially West Africa, would that just be a case of swapping, if you like, one devil or colonialist devil for a new colonialist devil, for want of a word? Can you hear me? Oops. Oh, Don't do this now, network. David, can you hear me? We're literally now just having a
Yes,
problem.
I don't know if I can hear you very well, but
Should I repeat again? Should I
yes, go
repeat?
ahead. I think you were breaking a little bit. Yes,
Right,
please.
okay.
Yes, go
But
ahead.
what I'm
Repeat,
saying
please.
is, I'll be very quick. What I'm saying is, in every room where you have Africa across the world, by digital or physical, some are pro-West, some are pro-West, and some are pro-Russia and China, etc., etc. The question is one better than the other, or are we merely swapping, one devil for another devil?
Yes, I mean, that's right. I, for one, being a very strong, pro-African, would think that to support the West against the East, for example, or be it China or Russia, is a big mistake. But there are processes that one is got to understand. Now, for example, people talk about the fact that Russia is all over Africa. Yes, we know that Russia was very instrumental during the time when it was the Soviet Union. They were very instrumental in the liberation movement against the West. And one of the reasons why South Africa is very loyal to the Russian brand has been that Russia was there during the period of apartheid. A lot of Africans have used that narrative, but the truth is that Africa must be able to continuously focus on its own interest rather than backing one horse over the other. When it comes to Russia, China, the United States, or other European states, I mean, their involvement in Africa is purely on the basis of their interest. So even if you want to support one or the other, it's still going to be business as usual. No country helps you because they like you, or because they don't like you. It's simply because they want to secure their geopolitical interests, their geostrategic interests. So it's more about their interests. So I think it's always very challenging for me to hear Africans, like myself, talking about the fact that we should swap maybe France with Russia. Now, again, back on that, one of the arguments has always been also that, you've got to look at what you call the greater evil and the lesser evil. A lot of Africans believe that the French have been exploiting the continent for a very long time. There hasn't been any development. Russia comes in a different package. The Chinese come in with a different package. They are not interested in political interference. They do not interfere in the internal affairs of countries. So we should go for them. So it's a matter of, when somebody is in a desperate position, like most African countries have been in the past, they want to kind of swap the greater enemy and replace them with, the smaller one. But effectively, I think what Africa needs is to be able to fight for an African interest rather than, trying to replace one evil by the
for
other.
another.
At the end of the day, whether it's Russia, or China or the United States or France, all they are there to do is to exploit the continent, from its mineral and human resources. So none of them is better. But if you want to choose between the good, the bad, and the ugly, then maybe you can take the ugly and leave the bad.
Okay.
But effectively, I think where Africa needs to be going towards is to, get to the point where the good of Africa has to be the priority for the continent.
Thank you. I'm going to try and stretch over to see if I can get a couple of messages from WhatsApp. Bear with me a second. Right.
Yeah.
Can you hear
Go
me?
ahead.
Right. I'm changing mics now. Hello, Cecile and David. What has Africa done what has ECOWAS done since inception to stop the economic strangulation and exploitation of its francophone member countries by France? Is ECOWAS oblivious of the injustice of France's actions? What has it done over the years to stop this? That's from Ayaba Esteri of Badagry. Go ahead.
That's a very good question. That's a very good question from Ayaba, from Badagry. I think the biggest challenge that ECOWAS has had in recent times especially with its declaration that it will use military intervention in Niger, has been the question of what has ECOWAS done, in terms of being an economic community of West African states. If these military juntas all through the Sahel have used the same justification, economic downturn, poverty, insecurity. So why has ECOWAS not been able to, come up with strategies that will enable the region to have economic sustainability? Why has ECOWAS not been able to come up with strategies economic policies that would, ensure that the continent continues to develop in a way that most of its member states do not remain as one of the poorest in the world. So these are very legitimate concerns, and this is why, going beyond that, some people have even asked if ECOWAS could put up a standby force to go to Niger, why has ECOWAS not been able to put up a standby force to go and fight insurgency in countries like Nigeria, in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, even in Niger, where there is a high level of insecurity? So I believe that ECOWAS is struggling from prioritization of its, of its position within the continent, and that itself, places it in a very difficult position.
Okay.
And I think even the issue of ECOWAS not being able to deal with member states who have changed the constitution, not being able to deal with member states who have been accused of getting to power through fraud, through electoral malpractices. These are some of the challenges that ECOWAS is facing, and this is why I think that's a very important question. And I hope that ECOWAS will look itself in the mirror and deal with some of these issues. Over to you.
Okay, I have another question. Good evening, Ireti. The junta in Niger is just taking advantage of the ignorance of the people of Niger by claiming they are fighting for the interest of the country against the French. They have uranium and they sell it to France and other partners at the international market. The uranium is not taken free of charge by any country. They will be exporting crude oil through Republic of Benin from next year, and it is Chinese and Singaporean companies that are involved, not French companies. That's from Andoze in Maryland. What do you have to say to that? Is that correct?
Well, I think she doesn't have the full information.
Okay.
And again, this is why I mentioned that there is a high level of misinformation and
Absolutely.
disinformation.
One of the reasons we have you here.
Yes, of course. I mean, there are French companies that are actively operating 3 mines in Niger, and one of them is the biggest mine deposit in the world. You might say that the people of Niger are ignorant. So if they were ignorant and they've always been ignorant, then they still remain the victims. There's no one who has, who is in the right frame of mind that would support a military coup. I don't think the Nigerians are supporting the military coup. I think what the Nigerians are looking for, they're looking for a government that wants to, care about their economy, wants to care about their daily necessities. I have seen and I've spoken to people across the continent. Nobody supports a military coup, but what we still do not want in the continent is a situation where the country is being exploited, in the way that it is. So yes, the people remain the victims, in my opinion. What the people are looking for is to survive.
Yeah.
You cannot have one of the biggest deposits of uranium in the world and still yet one of the poorest countries. So let's give the people an opportunity to choose their government. We don't want a military coup junta to continue in power. We want them to find a democratic process. But we also don't want Africa to be exploited by the West any longer, or any other country.
Any other country. Right. I have a question here from Anthony in Magodo. Anthony says, good afternoon. My question is, with the development of coups in West Africa, do you think a coup can happen in Nigeria? And is there a popular support for a coup in Nigeria?
Let me tell you why coups succeed.
Okay.
Because I think the question is asking for is why do some coups succeed and some coups fail?
Absolutely.
When it comes to military coup d'etats, one of the things that military coup plotters will look for is how much support are they going to get if they launch a coup d'etat. In the case of Nigeria, I don't think there is any appetite for a military coup d'etat. Nigeria has had its fair share of military coups. It has moved away from that. We are now talking about the democratic dispensation that began since 1999. Yes, there are challenges in terms of electoral processes, but there is no appetite for a military coup in Nigeria. But also, I think when you look at what I call the coup-proof mechanism that Nigeria has developed over time, the military is no longer close to power. And there has been some kind of a re-establishment of the military architecture in such a way that it will become very difficult for one military unit to carry out a military coup. Now, what Nigeria has done, which a lot of French African countries have not done, is that the people who are close to power, in the case of Nigeria, don't have the ability to carry out a coup. Those who have the ability to carry out a coup are not close to power. So, my direct answer to Mr. Anthony is that, I don't think there is, an appetite, and I don't think structurally, anyone can succeed using, a strategy or tactics, that could overthrow a president in Nigeria. But again, it doesn't mean that it cannot happen, but it also means that, it might not last for long, even if it does happen. Okay. Over to you.
Right. Okay, Wick, I know you've got to go on another station, so we've got a couple of minutes left, right?
No, it's fine. I mean, if there are questions, we can take them, so I'm good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Right. So I have here from Yinka in Ifako Ijaye. I will be able to answer one call, 0700 993 993 993, and the female only line is 0146571190. As you know, the show is going to be ending at 4. So, right, David, very quickly. The military is top. The analysis is top notch. That's what Yinka says. The military promised to hand over power in 3 years and set up a committee to modify the constitution to be more pro-Nigerian and be devoid of extreme Western exploitation. The cause to modify the constitution to be more is a valid cause. African resources should benefit African citizens more, regardless of foreign powers. Regardless of the foreign powers they associate with. Now, here's my question to you. Hold on, let me answer one call before they get upset that I'm monopolizing you. 1 second. Who's the lucky one? Hello?
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What's your name? Where are you calling from, please?
Yeah, my name is Emmanuel. I'm calling you from Ekwe.
Okay, go ahead, Emmanuel, very quickly.
My question is this military bases in Niger, those of the U.S., France or so. Is it not a spy and giving information, to these West African governments?
Okay.
Is it not a disadvantage for the
Nigerians?
That is my question.
Okay, thank you. I'll come to a second one. Hello?
Yes.
Very quickly. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What's your name and where are you calling from, please? And what's your question?
Oladele is my name. I'm calling from Isolo.
Go ahead, Dele.
Now, the response of your guest, Dave, to the person asking the likeliness of coup to take place in Nigeria, I wasn't too satisfied with his response. Okay,
but we don't have time. I'm only taking questions right now because we're about to run out of time.
Yeah, I'm putting it in the form of a question.
Okay.
Right? There are things that happen that eventually gives the surge to coup. Now, when such indices are happening, and the ECOWAS are not seeing it as in to address those issues on time before what we erupt will happen.
So, what is your question, please?
So, the question is, how do you prevent the coup?
Okay, thank you.
You only prevent it when there's intervention of wrongdoing.
Okay, thank you.
The government.
Thank you.
The government that is in place.
Thank
the
you.
Government that is, currently ruling. if they are not doing the right, it's expected that ECOWAS
I've got to go. I can only take questions. Thank you, sir. Right, David. Those 2 questions. That's why I was going to take questions on WhatsApp, because if I go to the phones, it will eat up into our time. I had a caller who wanted to know those bases, even though you said they're drone bases in Niger by America, etc. Are they not spy bases? Would they be spying on the Nigerians? That's one. And then the second one was, how do you prevent a coup from happening? But I think you already answered that when you talked about what a democratic government should do. So please just answer the one about the spies.
Well, in terms of the activities of these drone bases, one of the weaknesses that a lot of African countries have when they accept military bases is that they do not have control of the kind of activities that these military bases do carry along. So reconnaissance, surveillance, and intelligence gathering are key components of these bases. Now, a drone is meant to gather information. That information could be data, movement of people, and any other key intelligence. So yes, these military bases are meant for gathering information, and most often the challenge is that African countries who have these bases in their countries do not have control over these military bases. Now, I think another caller talked about the fact, mentioned the 3.
I actually want you to, because
that the military.
Sorry to interrupt you, because we're literally about to be cut off. We've got a minute left. What can ECOWAS do now? We've got in 1 minute. What can ECOWAS do, and what should we expect? 1 minute.
I think what ECOWAS needs to do is to now come down to a head-to-head discussion with the Nigerian military junta and break down, allow them to break down why they've selected 3 years for a transitional government. Of course, it will give ECOWAS the opportunity to determine how long it will take. At least they can now arrive at an agreed time frame for the military to hand over the transitional government. Now, that could also include terms like ensuring that the military does not be part of that transitional government, that it is not part of, it doesn't take part in the elections, that they have now to agree on a time frame on which they would release President Bazoum. All these threats of a military intervention should be shielded at this point in time, and ECOWAS should focus on engaging the military junta through dialogue. Okay.
I think that's it. We're out of time. David Otto, counter-terrorism expert on West Africa and director for Geneva Center for Africa's Security and Strategic Studies. David, let me just say David. David, thank you so much. Honestly, we're going to have you back longer time, because I like the fact that you like to take questions from the listeners, and that's what the listeners really want. So I hope we can call you back. Will you say yes?
Anytime. Thank you very much, and it's been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
These are important issues. Thank you so much.
God bless
you. To your
you.
Listeners.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's the end of Ad Facts. Yvonne is here with the news. Bye-bye. I'm done. Have a good weekend.
And I want to assume that you would run, because I want to give the listeners context for the conversation.
In 2019, you were running mate to Atiku Abubakar. What did you learn then that you will not repeat this time?
Yes, when is the president coming out to address us?
There's a few things. One, I have a burden and a passion for young people.
The fact that you have elected a man does not mean then you begin to order him around. The president will do whatever is good for the country at any given time.
Mr. Adeshino, isn't the president responsible to the people?
What should the next president do to root out stakeholders who are complicit?
You fire those that need to be fired are fired.
It's looking like a brand new Chelsea, attacking with so much fluidity. And what can you say about that, Martin? I know you follow Chelsea quite closely.
I live close to the Chelsea training ground. That's what you mean by that. I'm not.